Well, greetings and welcome, everybody. That seems to be my standard greeting. I don't really intend it that way, but I am such a creature of habit and pattern that seemingly I can't break it. So, welcome to a new year and the Outpost, which is a digital place where we're building bridges back to faith or strengthening the bridges that are already built. And what we're trying to do is emphasize and look at and unpack in whatever way authenticity and trust and grace and what it means for our relationships and having a commitment to intimacy itself. And so what our hope is to create a space where the doubters and the wounded and the confused and beat up and beat down and the bent and bruised who feel like their lives are a disappointment to God and feel accepted to God and feel accepted enough to be known and known by others. And we want to be a place where people can meet the biblical Jesus as he is, not as they have been told he is. And they can actually see it in action in relationships. And it's embodied truth rather than spoken truth in whatever fashion, and that can include somebody's willingness to stay put and stay committed and stay in relationship, whether they say that that's their motivation or not. So pull up a chair, get comfortable, relax. I had the distinct pleasure of being invited to be a part of a podcast called The Boundless Show. In podcast, it's hosted by Lisa Anderson, and it was down in Colorado Springs. And I want to share that with you and allow you to hear what was in that interview. And then when we're all finished, I will rejoin us and have a few very important announcements that I think many of you will be excited about. And that's what we'll talk about on the backside. So here is the interview.
Well, friends, Happy New Year. As I already said at the top of the show, we are squarely into 2025, and what better time to talk about grief. So I'm going to introduce you to our culture segment guest today. His name is Dr. Ray Mitsch, and he is the author of The Seasons of Our Grief, Embracing the Journey. And you're probably like, well, hey, what's up with that? Or many of you are probably like, oh, I'm so grateful for this because we just came through a holiday season. It is probably one of the more grief-filled seasons in our calendar year when people maybe get hit by grief in a number of different ways. You may have celebrated Christmas without a family member there. You may have anticipated something. You may have walked through some kind of a sickness or some kind of a loss in another sense. And so this is a great opportunity as we look to a new year to process what we have walked through, even some of the things that maybe we don't know about yet, because again, we have to have good truths around this and understand what God's role is in the process. And so, Ray, welcome to the Boundless Show.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, this is so great for us. Now, you are a professor of psychology at Colorado Christian University. You are a licensed professional counselor. You've been practicing for, let's just say, a while.
Yeah.
You look young. You don't look like an oldster. Okay, you're seasoned. You're well.
My beard ages quicker than I do.
There you go. So you're an expert in this. You actually, I'm really curious about this. You actually, it says you founded a nonprofit called Stained Glass International, which is actually squarely targeted toward Gen Z.
Yeah, it's right in your demographic.
Caring
for sure.
Probably because your connection with college students and all the stuff that you're learning from them. So you guys, He has a real heart for you. We talk mostly here to you 20 and 30-somethings, the college student, the young professional. And so anyway, so he's legit. He has his PhD in counseling psychology. And again, we're going to be talking about the book that he wrote titled The Seasons of Our Grief. And so I want to start out, Ray, with a little bit of your own story, because you have now walked with a personal injury for what is decades at this point.
For sure.
And I think that's so interesting because immediately when we think of grief, I think especially a lot of younger adults think of someone dying.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of griefs that we have to process and walk through. So talk a little bit about where your life was kind of turned upside down as a result of this.
Yeah. I was minding my own business and on my roof, and I stepped on the ladder, and me and the concrete met. And I had a head injury and a broken femur. And that all got patched up relatively easily, but I was left with pain, my head pain, and it's not a headache. A lot of people say, well, it's a headache. No, it's not a headache. It's like somebody put ice pick in your ear and swirls it around in there. And so I bounced from doctor to doctor. I lost my job. I really didn't have much of a job at the time, and found it difficult just to try to find my footing. And I was tired. I was tired of getting poked with needles and everything else. And I really just gave up. I gave up, and then a friend found a doctor that works with pain management. And I actually am, my students like to call me a cyborg because I actually have a pacemaker for pain in my head.
Wow.
And that has made me functional, essentially. And so then it's trying to rebuild. So the seasons I talk about, I have walked through, and I'm in the midst of it. I've had, losses within the last, 5-6 years now. One just last March, and I get to watch what I wrote, which is really inconvenient. But I think there's a lot of that like I put in my bio, I kind of got ambushed by God in the midst of my pain, and that's where a lot of my learning ends up coming from. Is that, and so. It's captured, I think, in the book as well, and the characters. So. And
it's like all of a sudden you're like, oh, C.S. Lewis said pain is God's megaphone, and now I'm walking that out. And none of us go, the one thing I need in my life is more pain or more grief. We're not searching for it, but it is something that comes to us all. We're going to experience, as a result of a broken world, a sinful world, we're going to experience loss and pain and hardship. And so what I think is really interesting, and the reason you have titled the book, The Seasons of Our Grief, is we are prone to think that grief is a linear process of just, I need to get through this. I need to white knuckle it. I need to, surely, this too will pass. And so we're just hopeful that every day is better and better until finally we're like, cool, it's done. We're good. Let's just pack it away and be done. But you're saying that that is not the case at all. And so I would love for you to let's talk a little bit about these seasons, because again, we don't want grief or loss or pain to hit us like the flu. I often use that analogy of just like, I'm just waiting for life to happen to me. Anytime we can have some intentionality toward it, it's good. But when you're talking about seasons, give us an understanding of what you mean.
Yeah, the prevailing knowledge is still based on Kubler-Ross's stages, and that's what tempts us into linearity. We say, well, I got through the denial stage, check. Let's move on to the next one. And the longer I've been in counseling, the longer I've seen my own process, it runs in cycles. And so I have looked at and read all of the material out there on grief, and probably the one that is most grounded in our development as humans is one that is built on tasks. So like winter, you have certain things to accomplish. Like in winter, your work is to accept the reality of what's happened. But each season has a different tool. You don't use the same tools. I'm not going to use my snowblower to get the leaves off my lawn. And so our temptation in thinking linearly makes it time limited instead of how we experience it throughout our lives. And, I think Kubler-Ross made the comment about we live purposeless lives because we really don't think we're ever going to die. And so grappling with death and grief is grappling with life. And that's probably one of the first things my students end up finding out. It's like, I thought this was going to be the most depressing class I've ever had. And it's like, no, we're talking about life here. And if I can have some measure of depth about that, then I can invest in what I got right now. So it starts with winter where everything's dead, literally and figuratively. And then it moves into spring where our feelings awake and we start to feel things. It's like, I want to be back in winter. And then beyond spring, then summer. And now we get a rhythm and we think life's getting back to normal, but then we get hijacked now and again by stuff from the winter. And here in Colorado, spring's not safe. You know, we get 34 inches of snow in April. That's just wrong. But and then once we get beyond summer, we move into fall. And fall is when all the colors come back. And so many people I've talked to who are grieving and go through this process and are willing to just lean into it, they're saying the color is coming back into my life. That's fall. But we all know what's coming next. And then anniversaries and winter and so on and so forth. So it creates a sense, I think, and that's why I kind of grit my teeth when people talk stages, because it creates this expectation that, well, I get through them all, I'm done, right? And it's like, well, no. So
no, that makes sense. I think also and maybe this is reflected in some of the seasons too, we always want to look around and whatever we're walking through, we want to compare it to what others have walked through or what we should, when my friend lost her grandma, this is how it played out. So that's what it should look like for me. And again, there's probably someone listening who their favorite grandma was gone this past Christmas, and it was the first Christmas without them. And so they're kind of like, what am I expecting? What does this look like? And what is the danger, would you say, in comparison? Well, first of all, how are we tempted to compare, and what's the danger in that?
Yeah, I think the comparison game is devastating because it robs us of living the life we have, not the one we don't have. And so the comparison thing, ultimately, whenever I compare, I'm always going to lose. Somebody's always going to have it better. Somebody's always going to be doing it better. And if that's the case and I apply it to grief, then I'm in real trouble versus where I'm at. And so the comparison issue is very much a big one. And people have such unique experiences when it comes to grieving that it looks like winter lasts 4 weeks. And then other people, winter lasts for 6 months. And it's like, well, shouldn't I be done by now? And that word should is a killer because should is usually a comparison. And so I think the biggest challenge is, like I say in the book, is kind of finding other people that are willing to live grief and live life as they have it, not as they wish it should be, and talk that through and bring it out. Because I can't fight something I don't name.
Yeah.
So
that's good. So to that end, though, it makes me curious, how can a person determine whether or not they're in a cycle, they're just doing the thing, they can't compare their story with someone else's. They may think, oh, this is something that happened 3 years ago. Why am I still dealing with this? What's the difference between that, something just being revisited, and something truly being debilitating where they might actually need to get some help beyond where they are? I mean, it's come to the point where they might actually be losing out on some life because of this.
Yeah, and so much of that is, in psychology, we refer to as pre-morbid. It's so much of that is what you bring with you into the loss. And so if I struggle with depression before, then I'm probably going to have it even more so.
Okay.
Which means I better find some help. I need to talk to somebody about it. See, winter ends up being very comforting because everything is quiet and I'm numb and I don't feel a lot and I'm good. And then we get to spring and everything wakes up. And so then like depression or anxiety seems to go into overdrive. And when it gets to that point where it's dominating all of our days and the language is language of grief, but it's still anxiety and depression, then I need to see somebody. On the other hand, there's a lot of times that I spend where I spend all of my time, and I've said this so many times, I spend all of my time normalizing the experience. It's like, no, that's a normal thing. So there's waxes and wanings of depression or discouragement or whatever.
Yeah.
And then there's not.
Right.
And that's grief. And unfortunately today we've pathologized grief.
Right. Right.
And that really gets in the way.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think, again, we think of grief as a solitary pursuit, like something that, I'm, where I referenced white knuckling it. Yeah. I'm just no one has experienced this like I have. We don't necessarily reach out to others. But I think it can be tricky because, Ray, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about it. It seems like either well-meaning people will offer platitudes that are just not helpful in grief. Comes to mind when someone loses a loved one. Well, now heaven has an angel. I mean, some things are just not even true. Some things are true, but maybe not helpful. Other things are just not even true.
Right.
But this idea of there are either platitudes or this idea that if we just wait it out, kind of which is almost a platitude, the time will heal all wounds. Right. What would you say, where do you see some of those most egregiously, and what is a better way for a friend or a family member to walk with someone towards any season of grief, quite frankly? Sure,
yeah. No, I think Christians aren't unique, but we have more ammunition for our platitudes.
Right.
And I call them ghost sentences. It sounds like it's helpful, but the person who's grieving, think about Job. Job's friends, unfortunately, a lot of us Christians are like his friends, and we're looking for an explanation for the disasters that has befallen him. And so I think to walk through is to live with that in the person and not try to correct. All of grief is about connection. It is not about correction. And when we start to correct it and say, like you said, they're in a better place. For somebody who's grieving, like where I've been, it's like, I don't care. I don't care. There is a hole in my heart that will never be filled. Now what? So there's that, and then the time heals all wounds. That, again, my head explodes because time does nothing other than either it passes or I do something with the time and make it count for healing and be a part of it. There's a huge paradox in grief because we want to run from it, and the way to get through it is to lean into it, and everything in us is screaming to go the other direction.
So true, because my dad passed away of cancer, and I remember during that time, you could tell some people were very reluctant to talk to me about my dad. They thought if I don't say anything, maybe I don't want to bring up something bad. I don't. But actually sharing memories of my dad and laughing about funny things my dad said and reminiscing was so helpful for me. So I had to tell people, no, do tell that story about my dad, or I don't want to act like he was never here. It felt like it was almost dishonoring of him to act like he was no longer, or that he had never been around. And so that is so helpful. But even getting back to Job's story, I think sometimes it's helpful just to be that person who's going to be present. Maybe you don't have to have a bunch of words. I don't know if there's wisdom in that, but
there is. I mean, apparently there are Mitchisms at CCU. And one of them is people desire our presence more than they desire our profundity. And that's what that is. Is be present with me. Because Job's friends weren't. They created distance by all the stuff that they wanted to say.
Right.
And we get really uncomfortable with Job stamping his feet and demanding an audience and everything else. It's like, that's what grief does. And you see C.S. Lewis's story. He really goes after God early. And he's saying when you need him the most, all you get is a double bolted door.
Right.
And that's that kind of honesty. I don't think it's going to take God off guard.
Sure.
And even if you look at Jesus and Lazarus, Lazarus' two sisters both say the same thing, but do it very differently. Martha gets in his chest and starts poking at him, and Mary says the same thing, but falls at his feet. Both in grief. and then Jesus weeps.
Sure. Well, I think one of the other challenges or one of the other traps we can easily fall into is this idea of kind of analysis paralysis, getting into all the what ifs. Well, would this have happened? What if I'd done this differently? What if I'd engaged in this way? What if I had, taken XYZ medication or researched more or whatever? Or I remember, again, thinking of my dad, I was determined I was going to juice him out of cancer, and I've read a few books. I'd heard that it had worked for some people. And I'm like, I bought the Champion juicer. I went after it. I'm like, this will be, and I'm naturally, I know you're shocked to hear this, Dr. Ray, but I am naturally a control freak.
No.
So I know, shocking. It's shocking. It's shocking. But I was just like, here, I'm going to do the things. And it was me just saying, I really don't trust God with this. So I need to step in and do this. But how can we get blindsided by the what ifs and get caught in that?
Yeah, I think it happens most in spring.
Okay.
And we're trying to make sense of reality.
True.
And so we write the story.
With the feelings.
Right.
Yeah.
And we write the story. And we write the story with a possible scenario. And so we really hate unfinished stories as humans. We absolutely hate them. And so that means then that I'm going to find a way to complete the circle, the story circle. And with that, then there's my answer. If I had, then they wouldn't have. And so those kinds of things goes to your point. It's like, I've got to control the ending outcome here. And the way that I do that is I reframe it so that it's back on me, because then I know who to blame. Then I know who to go after. Can't go after the person who's died, which ultimately sooner or later we're going to do. And that, my dad died when I was 12. It took me 10 years. I did all the wrong things. And I finally got around to saying, I am really ticked that you left. Well, congratulations. You just are now grieving. And that's what it takes, I think. And so we get so afraid of our anger that we're going to say something wrong that we cease to be human.
Sure. I know one of my things that I had to walk through, because I also, not too long ago, my mom passed away, and she had dementia, older, and I'm the youngest of 6 kids, so both my parents were older, but her last 3 months, she was in a memory care facility, and her kind of downhill slide was pretty fast, just a few days, and we knew it was coming. But I'd been with her that whole evening, so I went home to sleep and got the call at 5 a.m. that she had passed away. And immediately my what if was, I should have been there. I should have been holding her hand, singing hymns, praying for her, and all of that. And one of my dear friends said one of the most helpful things to me, and she said, Lisa, the one person who needed to be there was there, and that's Jesus. Yeah. And again, I think it's helpful for us to put, whatever season we're in, to put our heads around God, who can do all the things, quote unquote, fix anything, if there's anything we're doing wrong, anything we feel like it's just like, he holds it, and it can't, the blame, I blamed myself for a couple months probably for not being in the right place and not doing the right thing. So I think that is so helpful. Yeah. Well, I would love for you, Dr. Mitsch, to kind of in our last minute or so here, is there anything, there might be people listening who don't even know that they're grieving. Yeah. Maybe they've stuffed something, they haven't acknowledged, they thought they, quote, got over something, whatever. What does it look like to enter intentionally into this process and maybe ask the right questions? What should a person be aware of as they may be experiencing grief or may need to bring something up that hasn't been addressed?
Yeah, I think probably the one thing that comes to mind is that there's usually situations like in a movie that I have an abundant reaction to that's way out of proportion, and that's usually a telltale that there's a well that I've capped and it's pushing, and I start feeling it. So a lot of times that's, even the productive part of grief is that you move into it. You watch a movie. Well, we say, well, that's sad. Well, no, but it lets the wound weep, if you will, and that's all part of the growth. So I think situations that would remind us, and then being ambushed by emotions that don't make sense, and just talking to people and suddenly getting choked up, and it's like, what's up with that? And see, I think generally people don't ask that question.
Right.
They say, oh, this is inconvenient, or they apologize for their tears. It's like, what's going on with that?
Or they'll say, oh, I'm just an emotional person,
there you
or
go.
they're going to make something up,
That's
to
right.
explain it. So, or other people will say, you're really an emotional person.
Right.
Now I'm mad because now you just told me, no, don't tell me what I'm feeling.
It goes to sad to mad.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Right. So, well, such great insights here. And folks, I want you to know the book again that we've been talking about is The Seasons of Our Grief. I've been talking to Dr. Ray Mitsch. We want to make a copy of his book available to you for a gift of any amount. We are doing that again this year, where we always love getting our guests' resources into your hands. So how do you do that? Go to boundless.org, search for 883, this week's episode. You'll see the book cover there. You just click on it. You give a gift, whatever you can afford in the new year, to Boundless. And we're going to send a copy of the book as our thank you to you for being part of the Boundless family. And this might be something you need. You might need to gift this to someone. You might need to get it and read it with someone so you can make it happen. And I hope that I really, truly hope that you will. So, Dr. Mitsch, thanks again for being a guest here.
It's been a pleasure. All right. Well, I sure hope that you enjoyed the interview. It was fun to do with Lisa and to take her questions and to very, very briefly. You got to understand that when I do the grief and loss class at CCU, it takes me 15 weeks to unpack this stuff, and I had to condense it down to about 25 or 26 minutes. So it was a little frustrating to be able to not have more of a long form to work with, but that's okay. It's introducing people to the ideas that are contained within the book, but also I think part of a change in understanding about how we approach and look at grief. And so sometimes I think, as Lisa said, what better topic to start out the year with than talking about grief. At the same time, we typically will experience grief in the most profound and poignant ways during the holidays, because that's when people gather and there's an empty chair at the table and a presence is absent, and those kinds of things that really do, I think, hijack us and get us thinking about where we were the year before or whatever that may be. So that's what the interview was for, and that gives you a little bit of an idea of the book. And you can purchase it anywhere you buy books. You can get it at Amazon, and you can get it at our home, our digital home at sgi-net.org. That is where you find out everything. As a matter of fact, if you even want to ask questions, I will have a form there on the website, the page for the book itself. If you don't want to worry about the website at all and you just want to look at the book, you can find it at seasonsofourgrief.com. And you can also, that will take you straight there, and you'll have the opportunity to hear the backstory and some of the other things that go into that. And there's a form there for you to ask questions if you so desire, and you're welcome to take advantage of that as well. So now I teased at the front end a couple of big announcements, and I head into this with some trepidation, I would say. Partly because one of the, and it's excitement, I suppose, because one of the vision points of Stained Glass International is to provide a place, as I say at the very beginning, for the bent and bruised and the beat up and those folks to have someplace safe to go to talk about life as it is, not as it should be, and to understand that God's love for us is built on who we are as we are, not as we should be, because we're never going to be what we should be. So that's what the groups are, and that's the announcement that I want to get in front of you, is that we are initiating the process of getting groups online in wherever we have a confluence of people that want to do that. And so we are running a form for you to fill out for us that will allow us to get a sense of how many people are out there that are interested in participating, how many people are out there that feel like they are more than willing to get trained to be a leader. And we're not just plopping anybody into the leadership role. We have got set in place some leadership materials for people to be exposed to and to understand the warp and woof of what we're trying to accomplish in terms of our outpost communities and groups. And so that's we need to figure out both of those things. And so you can find that on the website at sgi-net.org. Click on the groups tab at the very top. It will take you to Outpost Groups, and when you go to that page, you will see a QR code that if you click on that or copy, you can also copy the URL that comes with it. Then you can go to the form and fill it out, and we would love to hear your feedback, love to hear your interest in it. And at this point in time, it is not location limited. It doesn't have to be in the Denver area. It can be wherever you are, and you have friends or other people that are around you that have expressed an interest in having a group that is not necessarily about Scripture. And I'm not saying that's wrong. Unfortunately, in a lot of cases, we hide behind Scripture and really aren't known other than what our opinions are about what Scripture might be talking about or the things that we can learn from it. And that's all good. It all has its place. But where do we talk about life as it is? And that's what these groups are really all about. And I like I said, I want leaders who are going to lead it that understand their role and understand what they're there for in terms of helping the people that are involved in that group, and really the sacred responsibility of leading a group like that. And that's not to intimidate anybody, but at the same time, we need people that are not going to use the group as a platform for their own opinions about whatever it might be. And there's a lot of material out there, and there's certainly material that we will be developing that you can have access to. Which leads me into the second announcement, and that is in the next 3 weeks, we will be launching a new e-course. It's called The Journey from Shame to Grace, and it can be found on the website. It's not quite ready yet, but it can be found on the website. It will have the opportunity for groups to get together, so there's your group opportunity to watch the videos, to hear the teaching that I do over the course of 16 weeks, and you can spend time together and use the discussion guide that comes with it that has questions and has an opportunity for you to reflect on some of those questions, so you can bring that into a group and share that with each other, and that can be very much a part of a group setting. The other aspects and the other resources will be forthcoming. We are just jumping into this boat, and we're hoping that it doesn't sink on us. But at the same time, that is a vision and a hope to accomplish that sets it somewhat apart from the typical Bible study group versus a life group, and it's that. And some other way of creating a context that is safe enough for people to allow themselves to be known and to know other people. So those are the two big announcements. The first one is the QR code on our website to allow you to fill out the form so we can get a fix on who's interested in being in a group, participating, and those that are interested in becoming leaders that may build on experiences you've already had, which would be great. But at the same time, we need to, when we're going to launch these groups, we need to have leaders that are ready to accept the responsibility of leading it well and caring for the people in that group well. So those are the two things. There are a couple things that I always mention at the end of these podcasts. Digital devotionals are still there. You're welcome to participate in it. At this point, it's about a year and a half's worth of material that you can get every week that will talk about boundaries in relationships. And we also have another podcast, which really is sharing the same material that I've done in this one with this interview. It's called Unscripted, the Collected Wisdom of Life, Living, and Sorrow. And I will start unpacking in that one. There's not a real agenda for that one. It is, as the name implies, is unscripted. And so I listen and I read and I get brainstorms and ideas and things to react to, and that's what shows up in Unscripted. In the podcast, in Outpost Podcast, there are things that I will run through, which I run through every year. This is our 5th year. I actually started this podcast under the name of the Psych Monologues way back in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic. And it has continued since then. So there's that, and that's another resource on the website. You can follow us on any social, on 3 separate, I shouldn't say any because it's not any, but 3 social media outlets. Instagram, we can be found at SGI_international, and Facebook at Stained Glass International, LinkedIn, Dr. Mitch, which is probably going to change so that we can have organizational one rather than my personal one. So the podcast is available for wherever you listen to podcasts. If you like what you hear, please leave a review. That certainly raises our profile so other people will find us. And if you're interested in partnering with us, we are ever so grateful for your willingness to partner with us. All of your contributions are tax deductible, and those funds are used not only for the development of the resources I just mentioned, but also to be able to build up and continue to build up a scholarship fund for not only students but other people to participate in our silent retreats, which are coming up. We have a CCU only one coming up in April, and I'm hoping to be able to do other ones in the future, and we will let you know on the website and also through the podcast. So there are a variety of other things on the website that you can check out and see what your interest is. Obviously, the books are there. The Grieving the Loss of Someone You Love and The Seasons of Our Grief are both there for your use. And so when you hit the website, subscribe to our online community. You'll get our newsletter that comes out roughly every month or thereabouts. And finally, if you would rather write us a physical check, you certainly can do that, or send us mail at Stained Glass International. The address is P.O. Box 322, East Lake, Colorado 80614. And we'd love to hear from you. And I would be happy to answer any questions. You DM me on Instagram or anywhere else. You can use the form on the website as well. And once we get the groups launched, they will have their own forum. And so you can interact with the people in your group through that forum. And it will be a secure forum where you can safely interact and not feel like you are being spied upon, which you won't be, not at least in ours. So we are, I should say, I am exploring ways to make sure that is completely secure and you can be confident of that when you engage it. So, that's a lot. Thanks so much for hanging with me all this time. And thanks so much for considering and participating in our survey if you're interested in something like that. And then we will be in touch. Let me put it that way. I have a person who's going to be acting as my coordinator of the groups, and we will slowly but surely get out of the gate, get the groups going, and supply the resources that are needed to help them along the way. So that's it for today. Thanks so much for joining me. And until next time, love ya. Later. Bye.